In the middle of a crowded live event, something happened that no one had imagined. The night was supposed to be about worship, music, and inspiration, but instead, it turned into a moment that left the entire audience shocked. Kirk Franklin, the gospel superstar known for his bold personality, suddenly stood up and confronted Bishop Noel Jones. You won't believe how quickly the atmosphere changed. Just seconds before, the room was full of cheers, music, and clapping. But the moment Kirk rose to his feet, silence spread like a wave. People froze in their seats, their eyes locked on him, waiting for what would happen next. Witnesses later said you could literally feel the tension in the air, as if the oxygen had been pulled out of the building. The surprising part was not just that Kirk stood up, but the timing. He chose the exact moment when Bishop Jones was in the middle of his fiery preaching, his voice filling the auditorium. Bishop Jones was speaking about leadership, faith, and responsibility, but some of his words carried a tone that made the younger people in the crowd uncomfortable. And this is where it gets interesting. Kirk Franklin, who was sitting in the front row, started reacting in a way no one could ignore. At first, he was quiet, nodding politely, but then his face began to change. His usual smile disappeared, his jaw tightened, and he shook his head. People sitting close to him saw him whispering to himself, almost as if he was holding back emotions that were ready to explode. Destiny took an unexpected turn when Bishop Jones made a bold statement that seemed to dismiss the new generation of gospel leaders. That was the breaking point for Kirk. Let me tell you, Kirk Franklin had spent his whole career fighting for young voices, for creativity, and for making gospel music reach everyone, not just a select few. So when he heard Bishop's words, it hit him in the heart. He could not stay silent anymore. Slowly, he stood up, grabbed the microphone, and looked straight at Bishop Jones. The audience gasped. Some even covered their mouths in shock, because no one thought Kirk would challenge a man of Bishop Jones's standing, and certainly not in front of thousands of people. But here is the shocking part. Kirk's voice did not shake. It was calm, steady, but filled with fire. He began by saying, "With all due respect, Bishop, I cannot sit here and let this moment pass without speaking the truth." The crowd erupted in mixed reactions. Some cheered instantly, while others looked nervous, unsure of what was about to come. What made this story different was that it was not happening behind closed doors, not in some quiet office, but right there in the open, with cameras rolling, with thousands of eyes watching. Kirk Franklin continued to speak, pointing out how the younger generation often felt dismissed, overlooked, and criticized by leaders who should have been guiding them. His words echoed through the hall. The church cannot keep closing its doors to the very people Jesus came to save. The craziest part was that the audience itself began to split, half-clapped, and shouted "Amen," while others shook their heads, muttering in disagreement. The clash between old and new had just begun, and this confrontation was only going to get deeper. The silence after Kirk Franklin's bold words did not last long. Bishop Noel Jones, a man known for his sharp mind and commanding presence, leaned forward and spoke into his microphone. His voice was deep and steady, and he said, "Brother Kirk, there is wisdom in tradition. You don't throw away the foundation just because you want to build something new. You strengthen it." His response drew loud applause from the older part of the crowd. Many stood on their feet, clapping with pride, grateful that Bishop Jones defended the way things had always been done. But you won't believe how quickly the room turned into a battlefield of voices. Younger fans shouted for Kirk, while elders shouted for Bishop Jones. The atmosphere grew heavier by the second. This is where it gets interesting. Kirk Franklin did not back down for even a moment. He lifted his hand, his voice rising with emotion, and said, "Respectfully, Bishop, foundations are meant to hold up houses, not cages. We cannot trap people in the past and expect them to thrive in the present. Music evolves, culture evolves, and if the church does not learn to evolve, it will become irrelevant. The crowd gasped, and then suddenly the auditorium was split almost in half, half shouting, "Yes, Kirk," while the other half clapped for Bishop Jones. Eyewitnesses later said it felt like watching two generals in the middle of a war, each with an army behind them. But here is the shocking part. This was no longer just a disagreement. It had become a clash of two visions, both standing firm, neither willing to bow. Bishop Jones hit back with force. His voice boomed through the hall as he said, "Brother Kirk, zeal without order leads to chaos. If every generation rewrites the standards, soon there will be no church left to hand down." The older audience roared with applause again, waving their hands in agreement. For them, Bishop's words carried the weight of history and respect. Still, Kirk Franklin stepped forward with even more fire in his tone. "Bishop," he said, his voice trembling with passion, "if the standards do not speak to the people of today, then what are we handing down? Rules without relationship, religion without relevance. That is why people are leaving the church, not because they don't love God, but because they don't feel the church loves them." The craziest part was how the crowd reacted. On one side, people jumped to their feet, clapping, screaming, and shouting encouragement at Kirk. On the other side, elders stood just as strong, applauding Bishop's defense of tradition. The entire auditorium had turned into a courtroom, with two men presenting their cases to the jury of the gospel world. Phones were in the air, cameras were recording, and within minutes, clips of the argument were spreading online. But destiny took an unexpected turn when Kirk made a thunderous statement that sent chills through the room. "You cannot preach about saving souls while ignoring the cries of the next generation. If we lose them, Bishop, then all our preaching is in vain." The silence that followed was almost unbearable. It was not the silence of boredom, but the silence of shock. The silence that comes when everyone knows they are witnessing history unfold. The room was frozen after Kirk Franklin's thunderous statement. For a brief moment, even Bishop Noel Jones seemed caught off guard. He leaned back slightly, his eyes narrowed, and his jaw tightened. The crowd held its breath, waiting for what he would say next. And let me tell you, Bishop Jones was not a man who stayed silent in the face of challenge. Slowly he spoke, his tone heavy with authority. "Son, the church is not a playground for experimentation. It is the house of God. We don't bow to culture. Culture bows to Christ." His words rolled across the room like thunder, and instantly, the older members of the audience stood to their feet with loud applause. They clapped, shouted, and nodded with approval, as if the bishop had just scored the winning point in a battle. But here is the shocking part. Kirk Franklin refused to step back. He leaned into his microphone, his voice shaking with passion, but still steady enough to cut through the noise. "With all due respect, Bishop, culture may bow to Christ, but Christ also walked into culture. He ate with sinners, he touched lepers, he met people exactly where they were. If the church won't meet people where they are, then we have lost sight of who Jesus really is." The crowd exploded instantly. Younger people cheered and clapped, raising their hands, while the traditionalists booed, muttered, and shouted, "No!" The auditorium was split in two, not just in opinion, but in energy. Some called it a revival, others called it chaos, but everyone knew something unforgettable was happening. This is where it gets interesting. What started as a church service now felt like a courtroom. Both men spoke with fire, as if they were lawyers arguing a case, except the jury was thousands of people watching live, and millions more online as videos started spreading like wildfire. Social media was already buzzing, hashtags forming within minutes, people choosing sides, and debates heating up far outside the walls of the building. Eyewitnesses said it felt like time had stopped. Some even worried the argument might turn physical because of how close both men stood and how charged the energy had become. Event staff and security shifted nervously near the stage, but no one dared to move. The craziest part was not only the words, but the weight behind them. For Bishop Jones, this was about protecting the church he had devoted his life to, preserving the foundation that had shaped generations. For Kirk Franklin, this was about fighting for a generation that felt ignored, lost, and abandoned by the very church meant to love them. It was no longer about music or preaching style. It was about the soul of the church itself. And just when it looked like the argument was about to spiral completely out of control, destiny took an unexpected turn. Bishop Noel Jones suddenly grew silent. He placed his microphone on the pulpit and stepped away from it. The crowd gasped in shock. Some thought he was storming off in anger. Others thought he was surrendering the fight. But what happened next surprised everyone even more. The crowd stared in disbelief as Bishop Noel Jones set the microphone down and stepped slowly toward the edge of the stage. For several seconds, he said nothing, and the silence became unbearable. People whispered, thinking he might be walking away, but destiny took an unexpected turn once again. Bishop Jones turned back toward Kirk Franklin, took a deep breath, and said, "You see, this is exactly why we must talk. Not behind closed doors, not in whispers, but openly right here. Because what you are saying, Brother Kirk, represents the voice of a generation crying out for relevance. And what I am saying represents the weight of generations before us who gave us the foundation. Both are true. Both are heavy. And the question is, how do we carry them together?" The audience gasped. No one had expected such humility. Let me tell you, the mood in the room shifted in an instant. People who had been yelling moments earlier now sat in stunned reflection. Kirk Franklin, who just minutes ago had been on fire with passion, slowly nodded his head. His voice softened, though his conviction stayed strong. "Bishop, that's all I've been asking. That's all this generation has been asking. Not to erase the foundation, but to be part of the building process, to bring our voices, our struggles, and our creativity into the church so it speaks to everyone, not just a select few." For the first time that night, the tension eased. Some clapped, others wiped their eyes, but everyone felt the weight of what was being said. And then came the craziest part. Bishop Jones stepped closer and stretched out his hand toward Kirk. The entire auditorium froze. People leaned forward in their seats, holding their breath. Would Kirk accept it? For a moment, it looked like he might hesitate, but then he reached out and clasped Bishop's hand firmly. The building erupted. Cheers, applause, even tears filled the room. The handshake became a symbol, proof that even in deep disagreement, unity was possible. It was more than two men shaking hands. It was a picture of reconciliation in the middle of division. Phones captured the moment, and within minutes, it was spreading online everywhere. But here's the shocking part. The story did not end with the handshake. Outside that auditorium, debates only grew louder. Some said Bishop Jones had softened too much. Others claimed Kirk Franklin had backed down too early. Social media turned the handshake into a new controversy with hashtags and arguments that carried on for weeks. Churches, forums, and gospel platforms were buzzing with one question. Who was right? Was it Bishop Jones defending tradition and order? Or was it Kirk Franklin pushing for relevance and inclusion? What makes this story different is that it was never just about two men. It was about the future of the church, about whether faith should remain rooted in the past or adapt to reach the present. The craziest part of all was that no one left the same that night. Some saw it as a revival, others as a warning, but everyone knew they had witnessed history. And even today, the debate has not ended. People are still asking, was Kirk Franklin out of line? Or was he simply saying what many were afraid to speak out loud? Did Bishop Jones handle it with wisdom, or did he miss a chance to stand stronger? The answers remain divided, but one thing is certain. The confrontation between Kirk Franklin and Bishop Noel Jones will be remembered as one of the most shocking and powerful moments in gospel history.